Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Before we get started, I just want to remind you that if you want to support this channel, if you want to keep me on air and make sure that I'm doing what I'm doing, and you want to make sure that you get the uncensored, unfiltered episodes, you can head over to blazetv.com/Auron and use the promo code Auron to get $30 off your prescription. You see, or your subscription rather. I mean, it's your prescription for truth, but you have to subscribe to Blaze TV to get that. You see that little announcement at the bottom below this YouTube video, the one that says that there's wrongthink and you need to be checking out the official sources. That means even though the dust has settled and President Trump will be the next leader of the United States, the attempt to censor is not over. So if you want to continue to support the Blaze and continue to support my work, head to blazetv.com/Auron. And again, you can use Auron at checkout to get that $30 off your subscription today. All right, so Matt Gaetz is out. That's the big announcement. Probably the most controversial and also the most energizing pick for fans of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Has now withdrawn his own name from contention. There's a lot of stories about the palace intrigue involved, different senators, yes, no, scandals. Could there have been a CIA cutout involved? All kinds of drama surrounding this, and the fact that Pam Bondi has been elevated as the new pick. Going to be getting into that, and I also want to talk a little bit about The Economist trying to push euthanasia in the UK. Talking about all of that with me today is your favorite frog, the Prudentialist. Thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks for having me on, Auron. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, we're going to be diving into Trump's newest appointments, the drama behind them, what it all means, and why every mass managerial state eventually tries to exterminate its population at scale. But before we get to all of that, guys, let me tell you about today's sponsor. Hey guys, if you're looking to break into the world of fully remote jobs, I want you to listen closely. There's a new job stacking program focused solely on how to land remote jobs, even if you don't have any remote work experience. The new Remote Work Mastery program is designed to get you to successfully implement the strategies that allow you to leverage your current skill set, whatever that happens to be, into a fully remote role. No need to learn any new complicated skills like coding or finance. This is all centered around what you already have experience with. There are a lot more remote job opportunities in today's marketplace that go beyond the typical IT job set. The job stacking team will walk you through the entire process of identifying suitable remote positions that adjust to your experience, optimizing your resume, and acing your job interview so that you're set up for success in the world of remote work. So if landing a remote job is something that you're interested in, go to jobstacking.com/masterremote and schedule a call with Rolf today. All right, so our biggest topic, like I said, is Matt Gaetz. When the different announcements were coming out, when people were floating who were going to be the appointments for the new Trump administration, there was a mix of surprise, excitement, and concern. Everybody knows that probably the largest issue that Donald Trump faced in his initial administration was one of staffing. Often he would put loyal people in, but they couldn't get the job done because they weren't swamp creatures, they didn't have the connections, they couldn't make things happen. And then he'd put swamp creatures in, and yes, they've got the connections, but they are against him, they're against his administration. Ultimately, they would betray him or ignore him. And so he really had this issue of trying to find competent people who could move the levers of power and make things happen that also had his interest, his agenda, the will of his voters in mind. Everyone was asking the question, if Donald Trump gets elected again, has he learned his lesson? Can he make things happen? Does he understand that personnel often is policy and it's critical to get the right people in? A lot of people were very excited about the changes made, the planning that was happening. And again, as the different people were being announced, it was rolling out. There were some cheers, there were some boos. One of the biggest cheers came from Matt Gaetz. Now, the interesting thing about Matt Gaetz is, of course, this is a guy who is known to be very brash and abrasive for a lot of people. He is good at manipulating the procedure inside the House. But he is also known for rubbing people the wrong way, building a lot of enemies. Many people in Congress hated him especially with him being involved in the Kevin McCarthy ousting. And so he had a very capable, very ferocious, but also a lot of bad will built around him. And most importantly, I guess, given his current ousting, it was the fact that he had allegations hounding him constantly about possibly being involved with a 17-year-old at some point. There's an investigation ongoing around that topic. And ultimately, when Gaetz was announced, the thought was, okay, this is a guy who, if he's going to carry this thing to the conclusion, will be a pit bull, right? He has no future in the House because he had burned so many bridges. Also, very importantly, he had taken no money from AIPAC, which is something that a lot of people really care about, making sure that there's no influence or possible corruption in that area, but also makes him probably someone who is less popular on the Hill. This is a guy who a lot of people said, okay, he's got nothing to lose. He's not bowed out. This is a guy who is willing to go all in for Trump. There's no future for him after. He's not going to try to burrow into the deep state because he's so hated. So this is exactly the kind of guy who can kind of burn these things to the ground and build them back up again. Go after Trump's enemies, these kind of things. A lot of people were very excited about that pick. However, if you're going to do somebody, like Matt Gaetz, if you're going to throw somebody like Matt Gaetz out there as kind of one of your headline picks, you got to be willing to follow through. And that's kind of what I said from the beginning is you don't throw a guy like Matt Gaetz out there unless you're trying to scare everybody into another pick, or you plan to really go to the mat, recess appointments, whatever you have to do to force this guy through. So him ending up in this situation is definitely very curious. Prudentialist, what are your first reactions?
I was initially surprised that it was Matt Gaetz himself that had withdrawn his name from the nomination process. I know that with various more pro-Trump members of the House of Representatives that they had said, recess appointments. And of course that, he has gotten cozy with Speaker Johnson, and Senator Thune has sort of offered, I guess, the sort of dicta of an olive branch for the Senate. And we've seen as this has come out that it's really come down to one or two couple of votes. We knew that McConnell and that Murkowski and the rest of them, including the incoming freshman senator from Utah, Senator Curtis, who is replacing Mitt Romney, who just seems to be Mitt Romney but uglier, which seems to be the statement I've seen make the rounds, which turned out to be very true, that was going to be sort of the deciding no vote. So it raises that kind of question of, well, weren't we going to get recess appointments? Because this has been standard procedure for a lot of presidents. I mean, both George H.W. Bush, and Ronald Reagan had hundreds of these recess appointments that were met with little to no opposition. But I think that it just comes to show that, you can make an ass out of the Democratic Party. It's actually really easy to do that. We do this all the time on Twitter. I mean, Auron's Twitter timeline is a great example of that. But at the same time, it illustrates that this is really Trump and his camp versus the Republican Party's establishment, which means you are dealing with the Senator John Thunes, you're dealing with the Mitch McConnells of the world, and you're going to be dealing with anyone that is not 100% on board with Trump's agenda. And so far, every person that he's nominated has been some kind of Trump loyalist. And I mean, Pam Bondi, who is the woman that he has announced to replace Matt Gaetz for the nomination for Attorney General, has been a long-standing figure in Florida politics for decades and has been loyal to Donald Trump on the issue of whether it be representing him in the first impeachment trial in the Senate, and of course the 2020 election, and representing him in all of the allegations and the very credible cases that Trump had put forward when it came to the discrepancies in that election. So I see that he's still aiming towards his push for loyalists, but it just does really tell you just how intractable Washington Republicans are going to be. It doesn't matter what you think of Matt Gaetz, or that you might find him weird or strange, or that his coif is well too manicured or whatever. Gaetz was someone that was known to piss off the Republican Party establishment, and for that, I'm a fan. In the same way I voted for Trump in 2016 and in 2020 and in 2024. It's the bull in the china shop. Hopefully he actually does more damage that's on credible targets. But I was surprised to see him withdraw, because I really did think that we were going to have this momentum where he was going to get more of what he wanted. But, we have to wake up and smell the coffee sometimes and realize that the bigger problem that we have to deal with outside of the deep state is the machinations of the establishment Republican Party.
Yeah, and this is a really horrible but true thing that you just have to recognize. When we talk about the uniparty, this is what we mean. As you pointed out, Murkowski, Susan Collins, John Curtis, and of course Mitch McConnell apparently were voicing their dissent, and that would be enough to deny Gaetz that appointment. But again, you have to assume that this was known, right? Like, you have to know that, very sadly, the Republican Party is just full of traitors. It's full of people who are more interested in maintaining the status quo than winning. The Republican Party really is, it's a bunch of losers. I mean, the Democratic Party, none of them voted against Joe Biden's appointments. It just doesn't happen. They all side with Joe Biden, even though they have their own internal disputes, they have their own differences. Obviously, we've talked a lot about different factions inside the Democratic Party and the left, but when it comes time to put people in power, they set that aside and they get the bulldogs in there. And that's what happened with Joe Biden. There are plenty of Republicans will cross the line and come over and vote for Joe Biden's appointments because, that's what the Constitution says they're supposed to do, or whatever garbage they throw out there. But they are unwilling to do this, to go ahead and vote for Trump's appointments. So they'll vote for Mayorkas. They'll vote for these people who are just ruining the country, destroying the country, but they will not vote for Matt Gaetz. This betrayal is just baked into the cake. And so the question becomes, how much did they know? How much did Trump recognize this? Because again, when you select someone like Gaetz, he's built a lot of bad blood on the Hill. He's got these allegations behind him. Then when you put him up there, you have to assume there's going to be a fight, right? You have to assume that with McConnell and these guys pushing back against you, you don't just, these are a big deal. You don't want to take a loss early on. You don't want to look like you can't get things done. You want to have a front that is winning, that's got a lot of momentum, especially after getting that mandate from the voters. So you want to select people that you're fairly certain you're going to get through, or that you've dedicated yourself to pushing through. And Gaetz had a lot of red flags when it came to confirmation. So I'm a little confused here because if you pick someone like Gaetz, you've got a couple of options. One, you wanted this guy, about the controversy, about the bad blood, that you're going to get betrayed, but you still think he is so valuable that you are going to do what you need to do. You're going to go for recess appointments, you're going to break arms, you're going to do whatever is necessary to go ahead and get him into his spot. Or you believe that Matt Gaetz is so terrifying that you put him out there to scare the leadership, both left and right, and say, okay, now whoever I put up next is going to basically fly through. Now, as you pointed out, Pam Bondi is somebody who is very much a Trump loyalist. I remember Pam Bondi back when I was doing Florida politics, when I was working on congressional campaigns. She was a lawyer out of the Tampa area and was well known. She's been a figure in Florida politics for a long time. We certainly have a Florida-occupied government. As you look at all of the different people that Trump is appointing, he is certainly looking for those loyalists. Whatever you might say about the people from Florida, they are. He is assembling that team from outside of Washington, D.C., competent people who are not attached to the Washington machine. Now, will those people stay loyal? Will they look to burrow in? That's the concern. That's what people liked about Matt Gaetz. He was so toxic that he was just very unlikely to seek a career, ingratiate himself to the machine. You could say the same is probably more true of people coming out of Florida than it would be if you were picking a bunch of people who were attached to the DC machine, but still the question sits there. But ultimately, it's a little confusing, like you said, that Matt Gaetz withdrew himself, because a lot of people are pointing to the allegations that he was facing in connection with, possibly soliciting a minor. He has denied all of that. He has said that all of that is a complete lie. In fact, if you look back, there's an old Tucker Carlson interview with him saying that there was a bribe put forward, a $25 million kind of embezzlement scheme put forward to try to take money from his father to get rid of these allegations, which seems kind of wild. But there have been other reports, and it's hard to know if you can verify these things, that possibly this information was obtained off another guy's phone in Florida, but that it was fabricated. There's like fake IDs and something involved, and so ultimately these charges might be false, but they were being used to try to extort this money from Matt Gaetz' father. Maybe the CIA is involved, the FBI. There's a lot of news flying around. But Gaetz should have known that all of this existed. Of course, he's been embroiled in these controversies for a long time. So it's kind of weird that, knowing he's not very popular with many of the GOP members, knowing that he has this investigation ongoing, that he would then enter into this arena only to withdraw himself at this point.
On one hand, I think that regardless of what the facts where they may lie with these allegations or with any sort of FBI or relationships to individuals trying to get someone out of Iran and everything that I've seen from quite a viral report about what's happened with respects to Matt Gaetz. But I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Even if only a drop of that is true, I think that it's well worth remembering that we did have, when Trump was in office the first time, his generals lied to him about troop presence in Syria. There was a coordinated effort with intelligence firms as well as actual members of the intelligence community openly conspiring against the president of the United States because they didn't like him. You had Milley and others, always trying to keep two eyes on him at all times to make sure he could never do anything stupid. And of course, a lot of this is probably fabricated, but the thought that they considered him that dangerous and probably did conspire against him illustrates that nothing is really beyond the reach if you are going to piss off the establishment in Washington, D.C. We see this sort of humor all the time. I mean, it can be something way more tamer, like Madison Cawthorn, who, is no longer in the House of Representatives because he decided to tell the general public that, hey, actually, there are these crazy drug-fueled sex parties that happen in Washington. And then just a few days later, these incriminating photos came out and all of the sort of compromise that they had on his materials and things like that came out. So, I mean, I wouldn't be beyond my wildest imagination to say that perhaps Gaetz and his family have been entrapped or have been caught on the wrong side, and they got, someone who made an indiscretion has now been just torn apart by the machinations of our intelligence community. But on top of that, I think that, the other thing to look at here is that his replacement probably was on some sort of short list. I mean, Pam Bondi works with Ballard Partners, which is she's been a registered lobbyist there since 2019. Susie Wiles, who is Trump's chief of staff and was one of the campaign managers along with Chris LaCivita, is also a lobbyist with that firm. So this was probably the chief of staff. It's probably Susie Wiles saying like, well, here's another pick that we can reliably go to. And here's the short list of reasons as to why you can support her. And I don't know if, I saw that there was Senator Lindsey Graham, everyone's favorite closeted senator in the United States in the Carolinas, talk about how, this person was a slam dunk or a pick, and it sounded very sarcastic, as if he wasn't happy. But I could be misreading that tweet, of course, because you can't really read tone over text. So it does raise the question of as to, well, what happened to recess appointments and what happened to things like that? But to me, I think that they have a deeper bench than just one person. And I think that is at least the silver lining out of all of this, is that regardless of Matt Gaetz getting in or not, or nominated for some other position or just withdrawing, that it has come with a deeper bench than, say, Trump scrambling to think of who's going to take the next pick. Because between him withdrawing, it's only been about, 24 hours or so since Pam Bondi had been named in the midst of him dropping out. So I think that it does give us a good sign, at the very least, that Trump has a bench of staff that he can work with to call from out of the roster. Now, there's some things about Pam that I'm not necessarily fond of, like in the 2018 Parkland shooting, she made it sound like she was pro red, flag laws with respects to gun confiscation, which is a huge issue for me. But, overall, he's got a roster and he's got a bench, so that gives us something.
Yeah, also not great performance during the Zimmerman.
No.
Yeah. But I will say this: the deputy attorney general is still going to be Todd Blanche, who's Trump's personal lawyer. So again, just a lot of people who are personally loyal, personally in his orbit, owe their careers and their connections to him in many ways. As you point out, Bondi is part of the America First Legal. She is tied into this network very tightly. So maybe not many people's first pick for, someone who would go in there and just be an absolute madman, taking everything down. But certainly, like you said, there's a bench there. There's depth. It's important to have that ability to switch people in who are competent. And so you do hope that hopefully they do have enough loyalty built in over at the DOJ with the Attorney General and the the deputy, that they're going to be able to get that work done. The reason I was a little concerned with the approach to Gaetz, and that's why I really want to know if this is totally just Gaetz surprising the Trump administration, or if this was something that they planned. If Gaetz is a feint, then that's a relatively interesting maneuver. Again, a lot of people are like, "Oh, Auron, you're talking about Trump playing 5D chess." No, I'm talking about Trump playing just 2D chess, like just having any strategy at all. There's this weird thing where if you assume there is any strategy at all, people are like, "Oh man, trusting the plan." Okay, QAnon guy. It's like, no, I'm just wondering if they had any form of basic strategy. I mean, Donald Trump wrote a book about the art of the deal and the big ask and the anchoring mechanism, and this would be a perfect example of using that strategy, the one he spoke about. So I don't feel like you're indulging in 5D chess fantasies to say, hey, maybe a guy who wrote a book about a specific strategy is using that strategy. However, if it wasn't that strategy, then the question becomes, did Gaetz just entirely broadside them with this withdrawal? And if not, then is Trump just not willing to go to bat right away? Because that's the bad side. Like, the worst case scenario is Trump selected this guy, he really wanted him, and then he just completely withdrew as soon as he got any kind of real pushback. That would be the worst case scenario. But since it looks like Gaetz did withdraw himself, you do hope that either this was the plan all along, or genuinely they were just surprised Gaetz ends up kind of pulling a fast one on Trump himself, and you end up in a situation where it's like, okay, well, then we go to the bench, you grab somebody like Pam Bondi.
Yeah, well, again, I think that one of the most and oldest negotiating tactics that's known is that you always you start with an ask that is way beyond the likelihood of them saying yes, which makes the likelihood of your second ask being more inclined to be picked. And I mean, I think that he still has, like you said, Todd Blanche there. He hasn't, lowered his rhetoric on any of his other picks. This is the only one that we've seen to withdraw, and the fact that he still thinks that everyone else has a strong chance. I mean, he hasn't, it's not like RFK Jr. has announced that he's going to withdraw. I think that there's probably some sort of strategy in mind here, and I think that this news is still fresh, so things can play out in the next couple of weeks, and this can age like milk or this can age like wine. But I think that it's important for us to sort of wait back and see what's happening here, because I think that the likelihood of someone like RFK getting in, that may come with actual Democratic support, because as soon as he was announced, you had senators like Cory Booker and other Democrats on the Hill, support the idea that we should work on making Americans healthier, that we do need to look at industrial farming and pharmaceutical companies and additives, which, I mean, it's not like RFK is great on a lot of issues, except for the ones that matter, like making Americans healthier. He was very progressive in his campaign, but I think that, there's some strategy that's being played here for what he wants to do. And I think that his camp, trying to be realistic, says, well, Attorney General may have some places or some limitations in mind, but I think that there's probably something of a strategy on the foreground here.
Yeah, you have to remember that there are other picks like Tulsi Gabbard, which sent people in. They were just as apoplectic about that selection. So there's a possibility that Gaetz was always meant to be kind of this foil that would initially open up the possibility of other slightly less controversial candidates sailing through, because they've already kind of spent their ammunition on crushing somebody like Gaetz out of the box. Now, interestingly, a lot of people were speculating, and I was among them, of whether this means that you move Gaetz into another position. Obviously, he did win his House seat, but he's already made it clear that he is not going to return to the Congress, so he will not be resuming his place there. A lot of people have speculated he possibly would get put into Rubio's seat, because Marco Rubio will be moving from the Senate to the State Department, and so that means that DeSantis has the option of naming his replacement to the senatorial seat in Florida. But I imagine if he's vacating the House seat, then it seems unlikely that would be the case, but it's possible. It seems like Gaetz is more or less said, I don't think I'm going to be in politics right now, especially with the allegations hanging over his head. But it's still possible he could still get placed into one of those positions. Either way, it will be very important who DeSantis picks to replace Marco Rubio. And I believe this creates a scenario where you have to actually elect someone to the House because Gaetz never sat. I think you get a special election. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I don't think that that DeSantis gets to put someone in for that entire term without an election. But we will have to see how all of that develops.
Yeah, and again, this is where Trump is going to have to see what kind of political avenues that DeSantis has in mind. I know that there isn't necessarily a limit on how many times you can be governor. I just know that there's a certain limit on how many consecutive terms you can serve as Florida governor. So I'm sure that DeSantis is thinking about his own political future in mind with all of this. So I'm sure that that plays a large role for what he wants to do in politics on the national stage if he still wishes to go that way. But I mean, I don't know how likely Gaetz will pursue. I don't think he's going away anytime soon. Heavens no, Gaetz is still incredibly young. I think he's only in his early 40s. Like his political career, for all intents and purposes, is young, and the momentum for the Republican Party, or at least the Trump wing of the Republican Party, seems to have a future. I think that it's important for us to remember that there really are two Republican parties. That right now you have the MAGA wing, and then you virtually have everybody else. And we already saw how that played out with the 2024 primary season when it came to all the presidential candidates. Virtually every never Trumper or Trump skeptic went for DeSantis or Nikki Haley or virtually any other candidate. And then, everyone else was either on Team Trump. And Republicans did not do nearly as well down ballot as Trump did, obviously, as the election results show us. So I think that, the future, I think, is still, there's a lot of open doors for Matt Gaetz, and whether he becomes a lobbyist or he pursues another elected or appointed official position in this administration or something within Florida politics, he's not going away anytime soon whatsoever. And I think the fact that we have a roster and that Trump has picked people that have been loyal to him or have garnered a sense of appeal of bipartisanship with these individuals like Tulsi Gabbard or RFK Jr., that you are getting sort of listen, there are clearly huge structural problems that are wrong with the United States government. These things need to be corrected. The question just becomes whether or not his campaign staff has the political will to shake up norms, because as we saw in 2020 and as we saw in 2016 in the first administration, that there was a lot of things keeping him from actually doing any significant damage to the administrative state, anything like that. And I think that anyone who is willing to even remotely wield the law like Democrats do is going to terrify them regardless. And so, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, Elon Musk, of all people, decided to play the same sort of strategy that Democrats do. Bus people, offer incentives to register to vote, things that Republicans don't traditionally do with their get out the vote efforts. And that had huge impact. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have seen Trump win this election the way that he had done in the margin that he had. And so I think that they kind of have a ball game to play here, but at the same time, these things really do have to go. And I think that now it's a question of what is the most realistic way to make that happen.
What do you think about this Florida focus? Because I think it's interesting. A lot of people suggested this was kind of the main selling point for DeSantis, along with all of Trump's legal troubles, was this idea that DeSantis had this power base in Florida. He had built this very competent structure there, a lot of connections, and all of these things are true. I think he deserves credit for this. But the idea was he could take that political machine into Washington, D.C., right? Like he wouldn't have to do what Trump did. He wouldn't have to source all of these picks from inside the swamp. He could take these competent people who are attached to his administration in Florida and transplant them into D.C. and create his own power base there. This is something that our Republican politicians basically never do. And one of the many reasons that all of these administrations are already captured by the time they get in there. But Trump seems to have basically just taken that page from the playbook. He said, all right, well, actually, I'm going to do that. I'm just going to lift a lot of these people directly out. Now, obviously, the Trump camp and the DeSantis camp inside of Florida is itself a split. So I'm not saying that these are one for one, every one of the picks that DeSantis would have brought in for sure. But ultimately, a lot of these people are connected. His Susie Wills is someone who was connected with the DeSantis campaign, though there are rumors that ultimately there was some bad blood there at the end. But Pam Bondi, these are people who have kind of worked with, brushed up with a lot of these. You saw obviously that Trump and guys like Elon were pushing for Rick Scott early on to be the head of the Senate. And so it really does feel like the idea was basically just take all of this infrastructure, this political infrastructure from Florida, and just install it into Washington, D.C. when you move in.
Yeah, and I think one of the things to consider with all of this sort of, I know that a lot of people like to joke that it's like a Florida-occupied government with respects to all of Trump's campaign, or his picks for his incoming administration this coming January. I think that one of the differences is that, you could, with DeSantis, if he wanted to be president, or as we saw with that, the man is an excellent administrator, not a great campaigner, and the people that he had working for him were awful. And if DeSantis were the pick, I'm sorry, never Trumpers, that he would have lost this election to an even less likable, less electable woman than Trump did when he beat Hillary Clinton. And so that should be a pretty... Yeah.
Can you imagine the negative charisma of DeSantis and Kamala Harris in a debate? Just like the...
It would be so bad that even DeSantis would have gone on the Call Her Daddy podcast. He's that lacking of charisma, but he's a great administrator. Like, as soon as he had dropped out from the presidential race, he was doing all those videos, doing all the legal work and explaining why, this government's actions were unconstitutional. It's like, well, where the hell was that guy for like the 8 months that you were running for office?
Right.
So, but I mean, also, Trump moved from New York to Florida. And since then, with his Mar-a-Lago resort, we get to have a second quote-unquote Camelot. We had that with sort of Kennedy, and we had this sort of palace intrigue of the Kennedy White House and this mythos. A lot of that, of course, is media, astroturfed and such. But I mean, with respects to Trump, like, you actually do have this tropical resort palace in which people go to in and out, and there is real palace intrigue that has it there. But also that Trump has been in politics and has been involved with the business world, the politics world, the international community for decades, long before DeSantis had rose to any sort of political prominence. And to see Trump just working out of sort of his own little Camp David down in the Florida, down in the Keys is kind of entertaining to watch, but also at the same time that Trump has a team, Trump has people that he can trust. And I mean, the one flaw that I think we did see out of his first term is that, a little too much flattery can sometimes get the worst people involved who will stab you in the back. But I think that, as Trump has said on this campaign trail, and as he has reiterated, he kind of has a better grasp of understanding of how Washington works. And the people that are around him are not only just veteran Florida politicians or people involved in Florida politics, but also that know what it means to win and deal with the national political scene, but also how to deal with Washington. Whereas I think DeSantis, while being a very talented administrator, is not going to put you in the best position to transition from, say, here's how we do things down in Florida versus, well, now you have to talk about people in Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, not to mention Capitol Hill.
Yeah, ultimately, I hope that this is not a sign of a poor planning, but simply a hiccup, or perhaps even a strategic move. I think ultimately there are still a number of strong picks. I think that there, like you said, that the upside is that there is a lot of loyalists around him, a lot of people from outside of Washington. There's a network that he controls entirely inside, this new White House administration that's going to be coming in. And I do hope that is going to be critical. I hope that does allow him to do the things he'd like to do, but I need to see some deportations, man. Like this needs to happen. And if you're going to make something like this happen, you really need to have, a steely-eyed will. You need to be able to throw off what people think about you. You need to be willing to hurt the political actors who are not going to get on board. They need to feel the political pain for their betrayal. This needs to be a very real thing that you're willing to get into. And so, like I said, my only concern was that a kind of knuckling under on Gaetz would indicate a wider interest in simply kind of taking the easy road and going back to Trump 1.0. And if we just get Trump 1.0, is it better than Kamala Harris? Of course it is. Does it still give us a level of breathing room that we wouldn't have had otherwise? Yes, I believe it does. But does it mean we're not going to get anything from DC? I hope that's not the case. Ultimately, though, you have to act that way, right? And that's still the way you should approach this. You should not expect Trump to save you. You should not expect him to change everything. If he does, that's fantastic. I will praise him when he does. I will be thankful when he does. And I encourage people to support him and to the extent to which he is getting all of that done. But ultimately, this is a reprieve and a time for building, a time for you to be able to organize, to make things better in your area, and get set up for a time in which you perhaps don't have someone in the White House who, at the very least, is not maliciously trying to destroy what you have built. That is, unfortunately, I think, the way that you have to view this moment, not because you want to be cynical, not because you want to be black-pilled, but because you want to be prepared. Like, the point is, you cannot have what we want unless you are building a virtuous community in which you are part. And if you are just pushing that responsibility to the side and saying, well, I voted and it's time to grill, then you kind of failed this, right? Like, so I hope Trump does what he said he's going to do. I hope he's competent. I hope he pushes these things through. I hope the momentum stays with him, but ultimately do not rely on that. Recognize this moment for what it is.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest thing that she pointed out there was that, desire to grill now that he won. Republicans, in a large extent, their voter base have often treated elections as political release valves, and to a large extent they are, and even still are to this day, even though the messaging has been clear for your lifetime and my lifetime that every election is the most important election of our lifetimes. And you have to vote like your life depended on it. And I mean, even Elon Musk earlier today making it very real, or earlier this campaign season, just saying that this is the last election if Trump doesn't get in. Well, I mean, again, you have to be putting the pressure on them. And I mean, even with the millions of people on his voter rolls and the people who've received campaign texts, if he were to get even 1% or even 0.1% of a return to pressure those people to call their senators and to call their congressmen, they could probably get a lot done with respects to their agenda, because nothing pisses off a senator or a congressman more than having their office filled with phone calls and letters for things that are really against what they wish to do for business as usual on Washington. Not that I'm a big advocate and a believer as a democracy enjoyer or anything like that, but I do know that, pressure works and the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And that with respects to Matt Gaetz, I mean, is he explained earlier on Charlie Kirk's show that everything that had been going on about him, he knew that the Senate would delay out of these ethics investigations, out of these salacious allegations that are against him. And I imagine that he probably didn't want to put his family through that, and that he has no desire to, put any extra hamper on Trump's momentum that he's got going for him for any other of his picks. Because if, Matt Gaetz, having his own long history in Washington and being a firebrand and making a lot of enemies, is going to put an uphill battle, I imagine a lot more energy and a lot more momentum is either going to have to be incurred and spent either to get recess appointments or to actually get people like, RFK Jr. or whoever else that Trump decides to go forward with and pick as actual cabinet positions for the Senate's advise and consent role in the Constitution. So I think that, some of this seems to be very deliberate, and a lot of this understands that, listen, we only have so much political capital, so much goodwill that we can expend before getting into office in January of 2025. Let's try and use it as politically savvy as possible, and let's be wise about it. That way we can actually push the bigger battles that we want to do, like deportations or, trying to gut, the administrative state.
So the other topic that we wanted to touch on today is the push now for euthanasia in the United Kingdom. The Economist has done a big story, a front page story about why it's important for the United Kingdom to embrace euthanasia. Hilariously, they say that it's critical that this liberty be granted, this fundamental liberty to die be granted to the people of the United Kingdom. I find that hilarious because the United Kingdom is currently a place where you cannot disagree with the government over immigration online lest you go to jail. So it's kind of funny that they don't have the fundamental liberty to say, actually, I don't want to be invaded or replaced, but they do have the fundamental liberty to die, which is just an amazing thing because, of course, we've seen the terrible response that this has had in Canada, the way that the government has already used this. We're always reassured when these kind of policies enter that they'll be carefully vetted, that there'll be experts involved, that everything will be very by the books. There'll be plenty of procedures. We know how we love our proceduralism to safeguard us. But we've already seen that all of the scary things that we predicted, the slippery slope that just would never happen in Canada, started pretty much right away. They were killing mentally ill people. They were killing people with depression. They were killing homeless people. They were even killing young people who were just sad. This is something that has already happened on a regular basis with Canadian healthcare. And it's amazing that people can look at this model and see the way that it's already being abused in a place like Canada and say, yeah, I really want to get me some of this.
Yeah, and I think that there are several things to consider here. I mean, one, I think that the euthanasia push is in large part as people like, the libertarian think tank writer Megan McArdle had pointed out several years ago, that one of the biggest things that depresses fertility, of course, is, lavish welfare and pension systems that actually decreases your dependency on having a large family to help take care of you, and it puts you more on the dependency of the nation state and the systems that are going to provide welfare and pensions and housing and medical care and the rest. So why bother about having a family? But also that, a lot of European states and America itself, outside of immigration, has seen its, TFR and its fertility rate crater. I mean, well below replacement levels. I mean, there are numerous nations inside of Europe and the European community. I mean, outside of just Britain. I mean, Italy is one of the oldest countries in terms of, how many people are above a certain age of 65 per capita. And so the logic of keeping the machine, the welfare system, the pension system, has been propagated on, we must have more workers in order to provide people to come in and add to that tax base so we can pay for the pensioners. 50, 60 years ago, the idea of Social Security made sense when there were about 4 to 5 workers per one pensioner on Social Security. That made sense. But when now it's almost the inverse of that, and that becomes the significant problem. And of course, it does not help that all the people that get brought into these countries anyways, both the United States, both in Britain, and various parts of the EU, they're all net negatives with regards to how they provide and pay into the systems. The only, net taxpayers in America outside of Asians and whites that's just it, really. The rest, more or less, in there are a drain on those sort of public services and public infrastructure with taxpayer money. So this is the system literally cannibalizing its own citizens for the purposes of saying, blood for the subsidies gods, blood for the Gibbs god. We must continue this system, because otherwise we are going to watch it collapse underneath our feet. And I have been alive long enough to have been told by numerous politicians, hell, even Jack Kemp talked about it, about the future insolvency of Social Security, that I would not be surprised if something like that came to the United States in one day, or in certain parts of in blue states, to say the least. But it illustrates that this is the managerial system cannibalizing its own, because these things have to continue. But as I had said earlier today on Twitter, euthanasia in an age of open borders is just another form of industrial culling of the native population. You want to talk about the Great Replacement? That's fine. That's great. But also keep in mind that what's going to accelerate that is a medicalized form of tyranny that says, well, the medical security state now says that if you're feeling sad, if you're getting a little too old, or you don't want to wait in line for that hip replacement, how about we just off you instead? And as we've already seen with the Canadian experiment play out only in the short couple of years it's been around for us, that it doesn't matter if you're a homeless vet, it doesn't matter that you are doing well for yourself, or even people who said, oh, I'm just going to off myself because I'm getting evicted and it's too hard of a struggle. The same thing's going to happen in Britain. And this is already on top of the fact that they are pushing for an exorbitant inheritance tax to punish farmers who are land rich but cash poor, and basically just simply to say, with all this other rhetoric, that the English countryside is not diverse enough, and if we can, break up the land reform, we will incorporate South Africa style expropriation, and if you feel bad about it, well, we can offer you a nice little suicide pod for 25 cents a use.
Yeah, there's so much to respond there to. So I guess I'll start with this. I want to write a larger article about this probably, but just the managerial mindset and its relentless drive towards this kind of industrial scale population elimination seems inevitable. This seems to be part of the way that the managerial state forms, right? That these mass bureaucracies and their relentless need for social programming. They try to control every aspect of everything from life to death. Don't worry if you're going to have a kid and you're a native, we can get rid of it for you. If you're too old and you're a native, we can eliminate you. We want to make sure, and people laughed. You remember everyone laughing at Sarah Palin when she said that government healthcare would inevitably lead to death panels? And here we are with exactly that prediction coming true on a regular basis. There is this scenario where as soon as the state gets enough involvement in healthcare and it's setting up the system, like you said, that is pushing it towards possible insolvency, the solution is to import as many people from outside of your country as possible and inevitably eliminate a large amount of your base population, your native population. I mean, who is getting old and dying? Well, it's a bunch of white British people, right? Same thing in Canada and inevitably America. Like who is the generation that is going to be falling under, the day of the pillow, right? It's going to be the whitest generation in those, in all of those different countries. And you look at what's happening in the UK. The UK is terrifying at this point. Starmer is just a soulless tyrant. It really is amazing. He just seems to hate everything that is good or beautiful or true. And one of the many things, as you point out, that is now being pushed in the UK is this need to diversify the countryside. That if you go, I've been to the UK a few times. You go into London, there's no British people there. There's very few British people in London. They're not there. But if you get out to the countryside, once you leave the major cities, then you start to see British people again. Then you get to see British culture again. I liked being in London. I like going to the different museums and seeing the sights. But honestly, the nicest part of those trips really was getting out to the countryside and experiencing British culture because there are British people there and it's still allowed to exist. Well, it turns out that's not okay anymore, and they need a project of dekulakization. Like we really are in a full-on Soviet-style scenario where we've got to get rid of these farmers. There's too many native British people who own farms. We've got to break it up. They're the rich, not the financial people running London. No, it's the people out in the country. They've got to go. And as you say, this all feels like, as you're culling the population with the euthanasia. If they've made your too hard for your family to have a home anymore, housing prices are exploding because so many immigrants have been moving in. Don't worry, you can just kill yourself, right? Like you can just have the government kill you, and that'll solve that problem. Oh, I see you're out there with that farm that's been in your family for generations. Well, looks like it's not diverse enough. We need to go ahead and get rid of it. It's hard not to notice the theme across all of these programs. The old population's got to go because the new population is the only thing that's going to be controllable and is going to pay the bills.
Yeah, and again, you can talk about any form of this economic system. You can talk about the welfare state, you can talk about, neoliberalism, offshoring, open borders, open trade, whatever. Is that we are now coming to the culmination of what that looks like. And when certain populations get too old, and obviously the system is borderline insolvent or very much is insolvent, and that there's no real way to balance the books because you have the short-term political problem of, well, we can raise the age of retirement. And then, of course, people who are near the age of retirement are going to get out and protest, and it's not very popular with a lot of lobbyists. I mean, the same thing with like Medicare and Medicaid spending in the United States. People really get upset when you talk about maybe raising the age of eligibility for it or changing who's allowed to be on it and vice versa. Or you can deal with the long-term problem of insolvency and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are going to have no form of assistance whatsoever. And of course, these things are sort of being put to themselves as part of this greater culture of anti-life. The system must survive. The institution must survive. And it does not matter whose blood is going to be fueling the engine that makes it run. Because in this instance, like you had mentioned, there are three big caveats into all of this. I mean, the first one, of course, is just the rampant antinatalism. I mean, the biggest election issue that Democrats ran on for this last election and in 2022 since Roe v. Wade has been preserving the right for you to kill your child. And as all the data indicates, over 90% of that procedure is elective. It is the choice that they make to murder their children. On top of this, we've noticed that with the Kamala Harris campaign, the only times that white people were ever shown in Democratic campaign ads were either A, about abortion, or B, making sure that you had access to your pornography. You were here to waste your life away and just to be a good, productive citizen for the tax base so we can subsidize the old people, but also the new people that are coming in. And it doesn't matter that what they make a month on, entitlements are going to be more than what you make in a month in your actual full-time job. And then, of course, you have this push for euthanasia, this push for, let us just kill the elderly. Those who are probably still capable of contributing to society, or at the very least still holding a role as a patriarchal or matriarchal figure in their family line. And of course, we've taken away the cultural necessity of taking care of our own, and instead we have made everyone an interchangeable, deracinated unit that says it is totally okay to pull the plug on grandma if it means that you can charge your phone for a few minutes, just because that's the only outlet that's available in the hospital room. And this system, again, has made it very clear that if you have kids, don't have very many because of the environment. Don't have children at all. And if anything, if you do get pregnant, you should abort them and you should waste your seed on pornography. And if you get too old, well, the family is going to make the decision and really push you, whether you like it or not, for you to, take the pills, take the IV solution or whatever, so that you can slip this mortal coil. We've desacralized family, desacralized life, and we've instead said as a system, and what we're now seeing in Britain is that, well, not only are we going to replace you, but we are going to kill the ones that you hold dear, whether by taxation, expropriation, or by a biomedical security state.
Yeah, again, it's just stunning how bad the UK has gotten. Have a lot of friends over there now, and I feel bad. It's a beautiful country, and it's terrible to see it go the way it's going. It just across the board, and this is just the latest in a long string of terrible decisions and abuses that are being visited upon the British people by their government, who just seems dead set on destroying that country as rapidly as possible. All right, guys, we're going to move over to the questions of the people. But before we do, Prudentialist, where can people find your excellent content when you're not on this show?
Well, as always, Auron, thank you so much for having me on. It is always a pleasure to be that great guest for a great stream that I hope people truly enjoy. So you can find me over on YouTube, on Rumble, on Odyssey as The Prudentialist. I'm also on Twitter and Telegram. Just look for the lovely amphibian that you see on screen. You can find me there, and find me at findmyfriends.net/The Prudentialist. I have a weekly show, usually on Tuesday evenings, with my friend Gio, called The Digital Archipelago, where we cover digital culture and what's going on in the news. I review a myriad of books on my Substack, as well as various issues that are going on in day to day. And I'm also doing a very series called Do You Even Read with my friend Dimes from Blood Satellite. We are beginning to do a little more theory, land acknowledgments on my channel as well. We'll be covering Anti-Oedipus this coming Monday. And then the Stalin's War series resumes this week as well.
Yeah, I know we've been doing, we had our series of, schizo philosophy Fridays. We moved to our rank punditry. So I'm glad you're continuing the philosophy over there. Let's go ahead and pick up our questions here. Political Thirstworm says, I've only ever voted for Trump. They don't follow his mandates at their cost because I simply will never vote for a Republican. Yeah, I think that's a very popular sentiment at this point. The Republican Party is pretty much hostile to the interests of the American people as much as the Democratic Party is. For a lot of people, Trump is the reason that they're being, motivated to involve themselves in Republican politics. And without kind of that MAGA movement, there's not a whole lot of energy in the Republican court. So the hope is that that momentum from Trump will continue to change the Republican Party more than the Republican Party can kind of stymie the advances of Trump's agenda, but we'll have to continue to see.
Yeah, you can hate leftists, but remember, the Republican Party hates you more.
That's exactly right. The left is the enemy. The right are the Republicans are the traitors. Let's see here. Cripper Weira says the black pill is a suppository. They want you to take it sooner rather than later. Yes, I will keep saying it until it sticks. Let's see. Philosophical again says the mandate is already faltering before a single Abula is deported. Shaky legs all over the place. Again, I hope that's not true. Trump certainly won a very convincing election. He has the mandate. He has the momentum. It's very clear that the left are a little shaken from the fact that he won in the convincing manner that he did. He didn't just eke out a win in the Electoral College, but won across the board. So it would be foolish. While I want to push Trump, I want to encourage good behavior. I want to be realistic in my analysis. I want to make it clear that I don't think people should be blackpilling. I don't think people should be really harshly counter signaling Trump right now. Not again that no, get up and do whatever Trump says and fall in line. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying give the man time, encourage him, push him in the right direction, but always do that while being on side. I think that really is something that people need to keep in mind. Again, you can't put all of your stock in Trump, but I think it's a little early to ultimately be throwing in these black pills as well.
Yeah, we can only find out when he's actually in office and what kind of insanity is coming in. Literally, we are only, 2 weeks since the election itself. I mean, there's still so much time between here and when he takes the oath of office for us to really find out anything and what his administration does in its first 100 days. But again, all the palace intrigue and all of the knife fighting between establishment Republicans, Trumpists, new right people, whatever camps that you want to call with or identify, we really need to be looking at this in the same way that the paleocons, the neocons duked it out in the midst of Reagan's election in 1980. That's the closest political parallel we have to this. And I think that there are enough people who have the money and the means to realize that you can't afford that decades long worth of containment again. But at the same time, I am happily prepared to be wrong on that. I've said before the election, I'll say it after, trust not in princes and the sons of men in whom there is no salvation. At the very least, Trump has bought yourself maybe 4 more years to prepare for God knows what comes after him.
Yep, that's exactly right. Robert Weinsfeld says the Gaetz replacement theory, was it a feint to get the next woman up? Are his closet skeletons fake or real? Yeah, again, it's hard to know, to what level the allegations are true. Obviously, allegations of sexual impropriety are thrown around constantly. They basically throw it at every male Republican or Republican appointee, including to the Supreme Court and everything else. Even when those people end up not even being that much of a Republican or a right-winger, they still pull these same tactics over and over again. It's difficult because you don't want to completely dismiss. You do want people who are, have a certain level of moral, upstandingness, but at the same time, these allegations come down on everybody. So you don't want to ignore things that are true, but they do them so often, they cry wolf so often that it's almost impossible to know, to what extent something like this is real.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also says DeSantis on Call Her Daddy pod, great stuff.
He would. He's got sort of that wet sock energy that comes with a lot of mainstream Republican candidates. I don't know. I think Robert's other point, though, about just you can call me whatever. I'm just noticing a series of patterns here. I'm noticing, as Steve Saylor might say, that a lot of Donald Trump's female picks for political appointments, whether it be the Supreme Court or otherwise, have not been particularly impressive. So Pam Bondi has that going against her by the nature of her sex alone. Sorry, Pam.
Andrew Guller says, off-topic question. Andrew Clavin keeps talking about the social imaginary, but never defines it. Any insight on what he's talking about? He says it comes from French existentialists. I gotta say, I've read some French existentialists, but I can't immediately place that. You have any familiarity with that term?
I've always heard that the social imaginary was the shared understanding of a society. That the French existentialists kind of pulled it from sort of Ernest Renan's questions of what is a nation. That there's a mutual understanding that every citizen has of its values, institutions, language, history, laws, religions, and things like that. It's just a common group identity that everyone sort of shares in their mind of what they conceive the state to be, and how is it reflected in their worldview, and how do they identify with it. I haven't read a lot of French existentialists. I've read a lot of French postmodernists, but I think that's more or less what the social imaginary is.
Yeah, that's what I would assume it would be just from the phrase, but I don't have any. I don't have enough knowledge beforehand to really speak on it in any depth. I mean, if that is the concept, then yeah, that obviously exists to an extent you could unpack that. But I don't want to go on at length about it if we're neither of us are just familiar ultimately. But thank you for the question there, Andrew. Creeper Weirdo says the left loves life. Oh, negative life. Gotcha. I see. Okay. Let's see here. And then John Morton says, exit boost for gammons on every street corner. They can sit down and watch something gammons liked back in BBC's 1991 adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and just drift away. Yeah, that's super dark, but unfortunately, that also seems to be not insignificant part of the plan when it comes to kind of the current United Kingdom. Again, I pray for that country. I hope things are turn out better. Have a lot of friends there now, and want to see you guys win and succeed. But gotta say, if we ever fix things over here, it might be time to head over and do a little bit of liberation of the UK. But solve our own problems first, I suppose.
Yeah, let's lead ourselves as the example of trying to fix our own stuff before we try and make anything worse. I mean, the American cultural exports of wokeness to the United Kingdom and other countries has been a disaster for their own conservative movements, because it's like the Columbian Exchange. You and I have a native immunological response to this, whereas talking about non-binary people and the Ibram X. Kendi style of racism has been just a mimetic smallpox that has been released on the old world. And if we are going to succeed in helping our European friends, we have to come up with an antidote to successfully kill it.
Yeah, the British have taken to the whiskey of wokeness in like a Cherokee who's never tasted the firewater. Yeah, it's a hilarious analogy. All right, guys. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Of course, if it's your first time on this channel, make sure that you go and subscribe. You need to click the bell, turn on the notifications so that you can catch these streams when they go live. If you have not subscribed to everything that the Prudentialist is doing, you most certainly need to solve that immediately. If you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you do, please leave a rating or review. It really helps with the algorithm magic. And with the Christmas season coming up, if you would like to get a book for that boomer in your life that does not quite grasp the current political situation, might I suggest The Total State? It's supposed to be coming out in audiobook as well, so if you've been holding out on that, you can go ahead and pick that up. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or order through your favorite local bookstore. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and as always, I will talk to you next time.